Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Annie Steward, and she has an amazing near-death experience. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Peggy. Thank you so much for the opportunity to tell this again.
Well, thank you for coming. Feel free to start wherever you like and take as long as you like.
All right, I think I'll start with a little background. Kate and I were just exactly a year apart. We were born in South Africa, and we were pretty close all our lives, but particularly the last, the last 30 years of it. But
And
10
that was your
years,
sister, Katie?
that was my sister Kate. Yes,
Okay.
she was a year older than me, exactly a year,
Oh,
and
had the same birthday?
I was one day before her because it was a leap year.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
And we had moved to the States about 30 years ago, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years prior to her passing. She did it totally naturally for the first 8.5 years or so, and then things started going south a bit. So she battled that. And then the last week, oh, no, sorry, the last 6 weeks of her life, she was home with me on hospice because it was all coming to crunch time. And with her came her, sorry, I've got a cat going at me here, came her two cats and her dog. And I had two cats. So I had a zoo here at home. And it went very well the first week. And then she came home on a Friday to me with me on hospice. And the following Friday, the cats got in a fight. And I got scratched or bitten or something. And there was a lot of blood all over the walls because I was trying to get the cats to stop. Um, and not being really smart, after washing it all off, I've remembered I had some antibiotics in the house, and I went and I took them, but I didn't check. Being allergic to penicillin, that was not the smart move. And within minutes, I was in anaphylaxis, and I was losing my hearing, and I was losing my sight. And a friend of Katie called a friend of ours, and who was an ICU nurse, and she came down and she said, "You need to get to the hospital immediately," which somebody did take me there while the friend sat with Kate. I don't remember too much about going into the hospital. I was in and out, but getting into the room, I was already all tubed up and stuff and IVs in. And the nurse said to me, "They're going to have to intubate me." And I remember telling her, no, I would prefer to try medication first before intubation. So she said, "Okay, they'll try, but they're not sure they can do that." And I remember hearing all the machines going crazy and my blood pressure was way through the roof. Um, and then I was out. And sometime during that time in that hospital room, I found myself back here at home. And I was above, kind of at ceiling height, but the house was not there. There wasn't a ceiling, so I was bumping up against it. I was just way above, looking down, and I saw Kate in her hospice bed, and everything was kind of a grayish outside or around. There was only Kate, and then I could see her friend sitting on the couch, in a place that she doesn't normally sit. But and then the question came. It was like the question came from me, but it wasn't a pre-planned question. And it was, "What happens if I die? What will happen to Katie?" And there was an answer that came back, but it wasn't from one voice. It wasn't from one entity or being or something. It was just kind of like surround sound, but not in a human way. And it said, "Don't worry, everything will be okay. She'll be okay." And the visual of Kate and the friend disappeared, and all the animals that now were fighting, so they never sat together, were all in a row, the four cats and the dog, and they were all looking up at me. And the same question came, what's going to happen to them? Will they be able to be kept together? Will they be okay? And the same answer was, "Don't worry, they'll be okay. Everything will be okay." And I felt that disappeared. And then uh, all my three adult kids, and they live in different states, they were all also in a row, all looking up at me. And the same question started forming. It wasn't even that it formed, but I could feel, I knew that was the same question. And immediately I was like, no, I'm not ready for that. So the question wasn't asked and the answer didn't happen. And then that was the end of that part of that. Then the nurse woke me up and she said, okay, you're okay. She said to me, you came really, really close. Please throw the meds away. You probably won't survive it next time. And she said I could go. But I remember watching her and seeing her mouth move, but I wasn't hearing her. It wasn't like the sound was going in my ears, but I knew what she was saying. I still thought it was weird. And I walked outside and out of the room, and I didn't know where to go because I'd never been to that hospital. Didn't know how I came in, so another nurse directed me out. And I walked outside. I walked down the corridor to get outside, but I was very aware that I must not touch anything. I mustn't go. There weren't walls because there were carts and things, but I knew I shouldn't touch anything. So I walked outside, and again I could see cars moving because now it's right outside the front of the ER department. You've got that wide piece of road where the cars come in and then to the parking area. And I could see the cars driving, and I could see people walking and talking, but I couldn't hear them. There was no sound going in at all. And I didn't at that point, it struck me that I didn't know whether I was alive or dead. So I thought, okay, I'm going to walk across the whole open area there was a sidewalk, a narrow sidewalk up against a brick building. I'll walk across to there and touch that wall and see if I'm alive because I really didn't know. So I walked and I gingerly touched the wall, but at the same time thinking, how will I feel? It was like I had two brains. How was I going to feel if my hand went through that brick? How would I feel about being dead, not alive anymore? I thought, well, that's only one way to find out. So I touched the wall, and as I went down, I sort of touched it more firmly and figured, okay, I'm not dead, but I still don't know what this is. I got to the end of that sidewalk, and it was probably the ER sign, the signboard on two metal posts. And I was tired and I wanted to lean against the posts, but I didn't want to lean against them and fall through them if I wasn't alive. So I found myself touching the pole for stability. And then I laughed because I thought, well, if I'm dead and I fall through the poles, nobody will see me anyway. So I was standing there and giggled a bit. And it took about 20 minutes to half an hour to get back to where I felt that I really was in this world. And then I called somebody to come and pick me up. And that was the end of that. They were both short in time. And there wasn't anything really, when I say remarkable, there wasn't any feeling, there wasn't any surprise, there wasn't any fear, there weren't bright lights. I didn't see anybody or any entity. And I just went home and carried on.
Your NDE was like my first NDE at 5 years old drowning. It was out of body.
Hmm.
Through the tunnel in heaven and all that, it was out of body because I was drowning underwater and all of a sudden I was at the ceiling looking down, watching my mom and sister get stuff out of the cabinet. I could feel their
Hmm.
emotions, so I could hear, what they were saying. And then back in my body continued, I guess the dying process, but and then, more happened. But so I can relate with that kind of going somewhere else. And
Yeah.
then when you come back, you now I could say, of course I couldn't understand at 5 years old or not even
Hmm.
55, but I think it's like you're having that dialogue with yourself when you come back. It's like it's
Hmm.
opened up this doorway to our subconscious, I think.
Yes.
If you want to call that the soul or subconscious, to where we are having this dialogue, like our brain, our human brain self, and then there's this soul self that's still
Yes.
searching and sensing and
Yes. Yeah, it was like a duel. There was
uh-huh.
and that came up very much in the shared death experience as well, where I felt there was two parts of me that was operating.
Do you want to go into that, or is there more in between, or?
Yeah, there was a couple of incidents in between, all the same, but in now that happened the first week, so I think that was right before Christmas that year. And she's now this month will be 2 years she's gone, so this is all so relatively new. Anyway, well, I got back from that experience and I didn't say anything for a couple of days. To confirm that one, just to come back to that one, was I actually spoke to the friend who was sitting on the couch. And I didn't tell her everything, but I asked her, why were you sitting in the middle seat on the couch? Because there's something leaning over the back or hanging over the back that it doesn't make it comfortable. You can't lean back. And her response was, well, how did you know? So to me, that was a confirmation that something happened. Again, terminology, I don't really know what to call it or how to. So a couple of weeks later, um, I've been Kate's sole caregiver. All our families further up north, so I was the only one. The friend would pop in every couple of days she could. She's an ICU nurse, so she was working shifts. And she came in the door and she took one look at me and she said, girl, you need a shower and you need to go and sleep, because I was operating on about 4 hours sleep at that time. So I went up to the other side of the house and I got into the shower and I'm standing in the shower. But because Aranel was an ICU nurse, I knew that Katie had even better care than what I could give her when she was in Aranel's charge. So I had let everything go. I was able just to totally relax. Standing under the shower, all of a sudden I feel Kate. Now Kate was in the living room and she's alive and she's sleeping, but she's still with us. And I felt her whole body come into me. And all I heard was, ha ha, sis, look what I can do. I just jumped out the shower. It was like I just didn't know how to deal with that,
Hmm.
because it was real, but how could it be?
Right.
So I let that one go and I came back in. I said to her, no, I'm fine. I need to get back to doing something. I didn't tell her anything. And a couple of days later, the same thing. I was in the shower and she, again, I felt her coming to, I could feel, not her, but I could feel an energy coming into me. And I knew it was Kate. And I thought, well, okay, let me see if it is her. So I reached up to touch my hair because her hair was coarser. So I'm now feeling like I am Kate. So if I am, her hair should be. And her hair was coarser to my touch. At the same time, I was aware that I was now in front of us looking at this. So I was feeling my hair and it being hers, as well as being able to see me doing that.
Mm.
And then that stopped. And that happened one more time. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting outside and I felt that again, but there was nothing more than that. I just felt it. And I just couldn't deal with it. And I was here alone. So I was just like, I can't. So it went away. And then I spoke to Aranel about it. And she said to me that you got to realize that you can tell or ask Katie to stop doing that. So when I went in the shower again and I felt her coming in again, I said, I love you, but please don't do it now. There's so much. I can't handle that, as well as take care of her and all the animals and everything. So that's not happened again. I wish it would, but it hasn't happened again. So, but it just made me realize that we have the power to do that, to say no, to say, don't do that.
Hmm.
Um, that was maybe 3 weeks before she passed away, that the last one happened, maybe 2.5 weeks. And then one day, Kate and I were having a conversation, and she looked at me and she became very tearful. And she had this little wobbly mouth. I could tell when she was trying to be strong or brave all through the years, but she got this little wobble in her mouth, and I knew. And she looked at me and she said, Annie, I'm worried about you. I think there's going to be two of us going. And I said to her, look, I'm going to feel like I want to die when you're gone, but I don't feel like I'm going to go. And that conversation didn't go on very long. She was like, okay, that's it. I asked her if she'd had this for a while. I did not ask her directly about the shower experience at all. And so she dropped that. And we didn't really talk about that because I felt that she was on her journey and I didn't want to give her extra things because she was very tied up into how she was feeling. And I felt that was the way it should be. So I didn't want to give her something to worry about. So we didn't talk about that. And then things got rapidly worse towards the end. She was fine one day, and then the next day she just was not fine anymore. And hospice had come in and said, she's imminent, she's going to be going soon. So Aranel stayed with me the Sunday night. We sat here on the couch just making sure that there was somebody with her. And Aranel wanted to make sure there was somebody with me because I had not had this experience before. And she knew how close Kate and I were. And we couldn't understand why Katie wasn't going. The first night, then the second night. And then the next morning, Aranel, it was about 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd been sitting here. We took care of what Kate needed, with wake up. And she said she had to go. And because she had shift that night as well, she needed to sleep. And she went across to Katie's bed and she leant over and kissed Kate on the forehead and said, "See you on the other side, gal." And I went and I let her out the door and locked the door behind her, and I came back in. And Kate was laying on her back and there was a tear running out of her eye. And the other one was, the tear was pooled. And that was a surprise to me because she had been non-responsive for 2 days. So it surprised me that she had emotion revolving, saying goodbye to Aranel. So me never having been in a situation directly before, I thought, let me just calm myself down, sit on the couch for a minute or two and just get myself ready, because I knew at that point that Kate was going to go on my watch with just me. And I came to sit on the couch, and as I sat down, I realized that that's not where I needed to be. I had to be right there with Kate. So I stood up. Aranel left about 7 in the morning. It was still dark outside. Florida, end of January. It was almost totally dark outside. So I sat on the couch, and then I thought, I have to get up and go to Katie, and I get up off the couch. But you know how when you get up, you're leaning forward and your face is kind of directed at the carpet. Right in front of me was this, it was like an alarm clock. My mom had one of these big alarm clocks with the numbers that lit up. The number 842. And I wasn't surprised. It was just like, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to deal with that. So I put it out of my mind. I got up, pulled the chair next to Katie's bed, dropped her railing, and put my head on the pillow next to her head. And there was an old South African lullaby, Tula, that my dad would sing to us back in South Africa as very young kids when we got hurt or were upset and he needed to calm us down. And I hadn't thought about this in years. And I could almost, and suddenly this lullaby was pouring out of my mouth into her ear. And I was about that far from her ear. But I could, in my mind, I could see it like a scroll. It was like a solid thing. And I was a little like, oh, that's okay, but it is. So I didn't spend any time on that thought. And then I noticed that the house had disappeared. The animals, the cats were now locked in various different areas of the house to stop them from fighting. The dog is not a quiet sleeper, so her snoring, but all of that had disappeared. My house was just the same gray mistiness of the NDE in the hospital, the same, that kind of thing. And I was only aware that I was from my shoulders up, or my armpits up, and Kate as well, even the top of her bed had disappeared into this gray mistiness. And again, I wasn't surprised or anything. And we were standing right after that realization hit. I found that we were standing on a road. Kate was to my right. It was a slightly convex road. And there were flowers and plants all the way down, but there were muted pastel colors. And even with those colors, I thought, wow, that would take an amazing photograph. It'd be a beautiful picture. And the color disappeared. And I realized in that moment that this was not for me. There's color, and I knew the flowers still had color, but I couldn't see them. So they weren't see-through, they weren't white, they were colorful, but I couldn't see the color. And then I realized Kate was next to me, and she had a very hard time standing up, let alone walking, the last 6 to 8 months of her life. So she was still all tensed up and everything. And I didn't look at her, but I just communicated with her, and it wasn't speaking. It was like I was passing a package to her. And I just said to her, no, sis, don't worry about it. You're fine. You can stand. You're solid on your feet again. And I could feel her bouncing around and her legs again. And then I could feel her joy in like, oh, I'm okay. So I told her that what we needed to do was to go down this road because at the end there would be a gate. And as I'm saying that to her, again, not verbally, but through packages almost, as I say, I wondered with my other brain how I knew that and how I wasn't surprised at being on the road. How did I know that we had to go down the road?
Like we keep this doubting Thomas around, this doubting
Yeah.
Thomas to keep questioning
But it was
our
just
logical
fleeting.
mind.
Yes. So and when I say standing on the road, I was not aware of our legs or feet. And then when I say we walked down the road, it wasn't walking. It wasn't like one foot in front of the other. We moved down the road. I don't know I don't know that we floated. I don't know that we walked. I don't know. And the last 6 months of Katie's life, whenever she had a mental, emotional, physical change she had to make, moving of a position, she would always say, "Give me a minute." So her response many times all the way down this road was, "Give me a minute." And I always said to her, "Don't worry, take all the time you need. I'm going to be right here." So we moved down the road, and and I don't know why it was halfway, but in my mind it was about halfway. She stopped solid, and she said, "No, Annie, I would rather stay with you." And I said to this, "That's not an option, unfortunately. I would rather she stayed with me, but we can't go back, we can't go sideways, and we can't stay here. So the only way forward, the only way we've got is to go forward." And then I had the time or the space to tell her again how utterly important she'd been to me in my life and how much she'd meant and helped me and guided me. And again, that was like a package being given to her. And she didn't respond in kind. She just stood there for a while and she said, "Give me a minute." And after a little bit, she said, "Okay, we can go on." And we moved further down the road. And from that halfway point to the next time we stopped, we were communicating the first part, but the second part I remember better in reassuring her that I'm going to be staying with her till the end. I'm not going anywhere. This is her journey, but I'm going to be with her till the end. And then we got to a point, in my mind, I feel it's about 8 to 10 feet away from the gate. From the halfway point on, I could see the gate, and I could see that there were beings behind the gate. Now, the gate had square pillars, and it was raised in the middle on the top, and it had bars coming down that you could see through, thin bars that you could see through, and I could see the people through there. So I was telling her, "Look, there's all your people waiting for you. That's where we're going." And she every now and again was like, "No, no, no, give me a minute, give me a minute." And then at about the 10 foot from this gate mark, she stopped. She didn't say anything, but I knew what was worrying her. She was concerned that the people were going to come and get her. She was an incredibly independent woman. She was capable. She loved doing things her way, but not in a negative way, but she just was capable of doing it, so chose to. So she was concerned that she would be taken, not that she could go. So I assured her that that's not the case. Look, everybody's standing with their hands next to them. Nobody's got their hands reached out. The gate's still closed. And we stopped. And I said to her, in order to open the gate to go through, you lift up either one of your hands, like you do in a classroom, and the gate will open. And she was, "Give me a minute, give me a minute." And so I said, "Before you open the gate, though, I need to take a step backwards. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be right at your shoulder, but I have to take a step backwards." And that was another time when my other brain said, "How did I know that?" But I just knew I had to. So I took the step back, and she stood there for a while, and we just watched, and we were looking through the gate. And at this point, her head was turning sideways to look at the people through the gate. And I was telling her, "There's mom and there's dad, and there's family and family friends and friends that she had lost when she was a teenager." And so she was becoming more curious. And then she asked me whether she could look at me one more time. And even though all the color was gone from everything, from us included. I was one step behind her. When she turned around almost all the way to look at me, her color was back. I could see her blue eyes. We were looking directly at each other, direct eye contact. I could see her brown hair and her skin. And she just looked healthy again. She looked like she was, and it's kind of weird to say, but she was at her healthiest when she had cancer the first 5 years. And she looked amazing. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked relaxed. But she didn't look at me for too long before she switched her gaze back to the gate and the people behind it. And I remember thinking, I wish she'd looked at me longer, but I'm more happy that she's now concentrating on where she's going and what's ahead of her and not still focusing on staying here. And she stood like that for a while, and we were watching. And then she lifted up her hand and her right hand, and the gate opened. Now, to the side of the gateposts, there was nothing. There was no fence. There was no walls. There was nothing. So when the gate opened, it opened, slid to the left. It disappeared into that left pillar. It was like it curled up into the pillar. It didn't go past the gatepost like gates do here. And so we stood there and we just watched, and I saw my mom and my dad and my aunts and my nephew who had died by suicide about 1.5 years before, young Matthew. He was right on the right-hand side. Everybody was standing there. They were separate entities, like a minimalist painting. With one stroke of a brush, you could do the body and then a circle, the head, and so on. But Matthew had, and I couldn't see their features. I knew they were all looking at Kate, but I could not see specifically their eyes, but I knew that they were looking at her, not me, even though we were right next to each other. But Matthew was leaning forward at the middle, and he had this big grin on his face. And I could feel what he was thinking. He was saying, my Auntie Kate's coming, my Auntie Kate's coming. And he was showing huge excitement. But he was the only one, and Kate and him were really close. But that was that was incredible, just seeing
Was
him
that
so
Kate's
excited.
son?
Kate's nephew.
Is both
My
you
Kate,
and you're like another sibling's child?
and yeah, my other sister's
Okay.
son. And Kate was standing, as I said, just one step ahead of me, and then she asked me, can she wave at me one more time? And she had this wonky little crooked wave. And I said, of course you can. I said, whenever you're ready, you take your time and you go. And she kind of half looked a little bit over her shoulder, and her left hand went up in this little wonky wave. And she had started walking, but jauntily. She was like, okay, I'm going somewhere exciting, somewhere good. She'd left me and everything behind, and she was 100% okay to go. So that hand went down, and her right hand went out to reach for everybody on the other side. And she went between the gate posts, and everybody was right there, and she went, and it was beautiful. It was just so amazing to see, because I know the talks we had. She never thought she would see mom and dad and aunts and friends and Matthew and so it was this incredible surprise, this beautiful thing she never expected to have. And she was right in the middle of it, and it was just quite something. And then I noticed just in front of the gate posts, it looked like, I thought with this brain, why is there hair laying on the ground? Because it wasn't a straight line. It was like a wavy line between the two gate posts. And then it split. It was like two continents drifting. It was on that split line, the gate posts and everybody behind just floated away. And when I say everybody, it wasn't just close friends and family. There were people that I knew who they were, and I could place them in her life, like her friend who died from a horse riding accident when they were teenagers. But there were a lot of people that, when you go to a crowded place and you see somebody and say, I know that person, I just can't place where from.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of those people. And I could see them less clearly than the people that I knew, The people that I knew and recognized were, I could see their clothing. I knew they had features, but I knew there were a lot of these people that I didn't see that clearly even. And that drifted away. And as it went into this mistiness that I still feel had a very light blue color to it, but again, I couldn't see the color. There was this voice that came from everywhere again that just said there was no praise, there was no internet, there was no expression with it. It just said, that was a job well done. And I didn't pay it any attention. It didn't even in that moment. I wasn't startled because I had no idea or no perception of there being beings watching what we were doing moving down this road. I didn't expect it. I didn't think it was going to or not going to happen. I thought it was just Kate and I didn't have a thought of what came next. So just heard this voice saying that was a job well done. And Katie and everybody was now right into the mist. And I found that I was to the left of where I had been. The road just melted out the end. So there was now no gate, no gatepost, no people. It was just a nothingness. And I was to the left in what I thought was like a pull-off. If you're traveling and you got pull-offs, cars can park. And in front of me, a little bit in the distance, was a cloud, but it wasn't a cloud up there. It was like a misty, almost cotton woolly cloud that was moving towards me. And I knew it was moving towards me, but again, I wasn't concerned about it. It was just something that was happening. And okay, it's just something happening. I wasn't worried or unworried. I was just in the moment. And it totally engulfed me or wrapped around me. And I remember knowing that I was being held upright, but I wasn't standing and I wasn't floating. I was just kind of like a little bit like a silkworm inside a cocoon, I guess. You're just inside this cocoon. And it felt like I was being put back together. And I likened it even then to when you build a puzzle and then the pieces get shifted out of place. I was being slotted back into place. And I don't know how long that lasted for, but there was a pop sensation. It wasn't a sound I heard. It was more of a feeling of pop. And then I was back, still leaning over Kate's bed with my head on the pillow right next to her. It was bright daylight outside. And I lifted up my eyes and I could hear the animals again. And I lifted my eyes to there was a clock on the wall and the second hand clicked across to 8:42 in the morning. And so I looked at that and I looked down at Kate and she breathed her last breath into my face. So it was, I'm standing there still bent over her, bent over the bed. And this most incredible thing that I didn't know was possible, but was real, more real than being here back in my house. And then seeing my sister, was my other half, had now died. So it was hard to figure out what was reality and what wasn't reality and what had just happened. So it took me a couple of days to even start concentrating on that experience, not on the fact that Katie wasn't here anymore.
Did it feel scary?
Oh,
Okay. Because I've had some
no,
experience, not like that, detail, but I always get scared. I pull back and get scared of what just happened.
no, I wasn't scared at all. And that's part of the puzzlement, even today, nearly two years later, and also a lot of other things that after this experience, I started remembering the other things that have been happening to me since I was about 18 that I had just put aside, like I did the hospital experience and the shower experience. Life had been busy. And some of them were like, how come didn't I get scared? How come did I just take it as just something that it's normal? This happens, and then you put it aside and you move on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's in a way I look at it and think all those experiences to me were like you drop a mug full of coffee and you clean it up and then you carry on with your day. But big one, that shared death with Katie, was the one that woke me up to realize that all these things had been happening, and they weren't. When I say they're not normal, they are normal, I think, but that I just haven't given them the attention they deserved.
Yeah, that voice that tells us this can't be real or tries to doubt it, it must win at some point, that we push these things away. And then at
Yeah.
some point, when we start to realize these were real, maybe like that voice gets pushed out of the way where we can fully see and find a place to put them.
Yes. And that helps to finally, it was almost like somebody was saying, or something, or whatever was saying all the years, here, look here, look here. And I'm like, no, I've got other stuff to do. And then this one was like, okay, now you will look at this. So that was how it seems. It was almost like it had been building over my life to get to that, whether it was so that I could do that with Kate, or because now you really need to pay attention.
And
I,
those voices that tell us, you will, blah, blah, blah. And that's us speaking to us.
yes,
And that's what I have learned to start paying attention to because I dismissed it for so long. When I
yes,
start arguing with myself, when it's you this, you that, like, wait a minute, this isn't my normal me here. This is
yeah.
something else coming in.
And it's that's been interesting to listen to, that little thing that just flicks into your head and you say, eh. And whether it's something simple or something big, I find now that I pay attention to it, or when I don't pay attention and something happens, I'm like, why didn't I listen to that?
Uh-huh.
So I'm much more aware of that, along with a whole lot of other things that happened after Katie died. Um, Things that I just I can't explain, but I accept as being, she's still here, she's still in contact. There's, the one night I woke up and I didn't wake up and then turn around. I woke up turning, and I was aware I'm waking up kind of almost all the way turned over in bed, because I knew Kate was standing on the other side of the bed. And she was there. She was standing right next to the bed, and as solid as I am now, as three-dimensional. She had khaki shorts on. She wasn't standing on the floor. She was slightly higher than that, because she was looking down at me, but I knew, well, I could see her knees, and the bed height wouldn't, if she was standing on the ground, I couldn't see. So I knew she was wearing khakis. I could see her legs. She had really good little legs, so I could see that. She had a shirt on I didn't recognize, and a ball cap, and she simply said, "Hi, Annie." And then I went back to sleep. And there's been so many things that I cannot just dismiss them anymore. They're there. They're as real, if not more real, than here today. So it's been an interesting ride.
It is. And trying to find words for it and trying to find people we can trust to tell it.
Well, and I think that's a big part of it, because been I've I've done a couple of the interviews here on YouTube, but I find it easier to talk like this than to tell my neighbor
Yeah.
or a friend, because there's how are they going to respond? Just the other night, I had the opportunity. I was telling somebody one of my neighbors had been found passed away in her house, so we sat outside, just one of the other ladies and I, and we chatted, and I got to tell her the story, and it was interesting to see how she received it. And a day or two, the next 2 days later, she actually texted me and she said, "Thank you so much for that. That helped," because her mom had passed a year or so before. So there's almost, I feel, almost a responsibility to tell people. But that is it's my truth. I don't know how other people are going to take it. So I'm very cautious about who
Yeah, we
I
need to be.
yeah,
Because we don't want to start going on telling somebody that we know full well isn't ready to accept it or doesn't want to hear it. But
yeah,
then when we get those feelings, I think this is someone that needs to hear it. You kind of test the waters, start telling them a little bit and
yeah.
see if this is something they do want.
Well, it's interesting because I since Katie has passed away, there's been a different kind of um, knowing things. I know when to stop, even if the subject comes up. There have been two times now when it's like, nope, don't share your story. And other times where I've walked up flat to somebody that I've seen in the neighborhood and said, I need to tell you this. And mostly they've been right so far, especially the last 6 or 8 months. Before it was a little bit more hairy. But now I'm listening to that voice that says no or yes. And that's been interesting learning that as well.
And it's fascinating how these memories are like entombed somewhere in us so perfectly that we can remember every thought and every
Yes.
counter thought and this dialogue, all this
Mhm.
stuff that goes on usually day to day unconsciously. We're so aware of it, and it is like frozen in time that when we
Yes.
remember it, it's exact memory. And I
Yes.
can't tell you a few minutes ago what I thought, and then I thought this, then I thought that. It don't work like that.
Yeah.
But I think when we've been on the other side, either NDE, shared death experience or whatever, and then we remember those, it's like in that space, like I call it soul memory. Like
Yeah.
we're not remembering with our brain. And people
Hmm.
want to dismiss NDEs on chemicals of the brain or take drugs to have an NDE. I'm like, it has nothing to do with the brain and
No.
chemicals. It's
No.
it's out of the body, out of the brain, and in our soul when you fully experienced twice.
And I think in a way I was doing something about it a couple of months ago because somebody used the same words, these memories. And to me, it's not a memory like we have other memories of whatever. Okay. This is more of a like we know how to walk without thinking. We don't have to remember how to walk. We just know
Yeah.
how to walk. That and again, you talk about having the right words. I don't have the right words to explain that. But these experiences are more than a memory. They're deeper than a memory. They're more real than a memory. So it's um I don't know how to explain what they are, but for me it's not just a memory. It's
Mhm.
more in tune with my body, like we walk or we breathe or do
Yeah.
those things that are natural functions.
And we never have to worry about, say, if we're going to go speak in front of a big audience, small audience, or wherever, about being nervous, remembering anything, because it's effortless.
Yeah,
All we have
and
to do
that
is relax and
and
get
just
back in that space, and it's so effortless. The words just come naturally.
well, that was the things about I think the third day after Katie died, it was like, oh my God, I better write this down because what if I forget it? And and I quickly did write the the pages and pages of it down. And then a couple of months, and then I spent some time researching to see what it was because I didn't know that I'd never heard the term shared death experience. I'd read near death experiences and stuff, but I'd never heard the shared death. I didn't know something like this was possible. Um, I haven't read that since. It's here. It's part of who I am. It's not just a memory that I have to remember the sequence of the or what happened or who said what or felt what. Starting to tell you about it was just it's there. It's passing the information on, not a passing of a memory. It's interesting. You say yes, it is. It's there.
I had a shared death experience with my ex-mother-in-law, passed
Uh,
away. And but I was so shocked. I never heard of such a thing, didn't know what was going on. She had passed away. Her 12 kids was outside in the hallway, and my ex had said, if you want to see mom, you can go in now. So I took my daughter-in-law with me, and I put my right hand on her arm, just kind of say hi. Even though I know she had passed, it was just
mm,
my way of saying hi and goodbye to her.
yeah,
Just put my hand on her arm, and the moment I did, it was like we picked up the phone. We were on it's like we just spoke the phone because immediately she starts, you need to bring me back. You need to bring me back. And in my mind, I'm like, I can't bring you back because I'm hearing her.
yeah,
And so in my
yeah,
mind, I'm responding to her. And at the same time, I'm looking around. Here's my daughter-in-law standing beside me and the two of her kids on the other side of the bed. I don't want to look like a weirdo. But this is going
yeah.
on. How do I keep a poker face?
Mhm.
And so
I know.
I'm like, I'm just, holding on to her arm. And I'm like, you got to go back. She's, no, you got to bring me back. She's like, I can't bring you back. I said, isn't Pappy, that was her husband that passed before her.
Mhm.
Isn't Pappy there? Your brothers, sisters, your parents? Isn't somebody there? Like, go to them. Like, stay away from me, and like, just go. And then
Uh-huh.
she wanted me to bring her back. And I was like, listen, you had a beautiful death. All 12 of your kids was around you.
Mhm.
You're saying the prayers and singing the hymns. They're a big Catholic family. And I said, you had
Mhm.
a beautiful death. Nothing is here for you but pain. You broke your hip and had a massive heart attack. There's nothing here for you but pain. You don't want brought back. And like, I
Mhm.
can't bring you back anyway, but you don't want brought
Yeah.
back. Because the next time you might go through a lot of pain and then your kids aren't here or something, you had a beautiful death. Just go. And all this is going on. And then I pulled my hand off of her, like hanging up the phone on her. And
Mhm.
I stepped back and I just walked out of the room. Of course, I didn't tell anybody for a long time. And then
Yeah.
she started showing up at the end of the bed at night. And so finally one night I was like, okay, Mary, I said, I turned on the light in the living room and on my bedroom and got my Bible and a pen. I said, I'm going to write down what you have to say to me because you're coming to me for a reason. And so I wrote down what happened, but it wasn't like she just told me something. It was, all of a sudden I had this memory, like she put this memory in my mind. It was when I was married to her son. I was about 25. So this is like maybe 30 years after, the fact. And, was at their house and she was standing at her sink doing dishes. She had her back to me and her husband was in front of their golden color phone on the wall. And I had walked into their house and Pappy said to me, you are our Loretta. Loretta was her stillborn. That would have been my age. That come
Wow.
home in a shoebox.
Wow.
And he said she would have been 13 of the kids of their 12. And he says, you are our Loretta. I'm like, what? Because I'm 25 years old, right? And I'm like, what? He says, yeah, me and mommy talked about it. We love you like a daughter. You look like you could be one of our kids. You are our Loretta. And I took it as, you're nuts. I'm thinking, I could tell he's not drunk because he was an alcoholic, but he wasn't drinking. And
Mhm.
and he looked at, he's, huh, mommy? And she says, yep. And I walked out of the
Wow.
house shaking my head like weirdos, right? Weirdos, thinking
Yeah.
I'm their Loretta. Well, now that she's like put this memory in my mind, it was just their way of saying, I kind of felt him there too, but it was like more her for that this is just their way of saying, we loved you like a daughter.
Yeah.
And that's how they
Yeah.
meant it. And I took it,
Mhm. Took it
differently.
the
And
other way. Yeah.
yeah, like you.
Yeah.
And so that's all it was.
That's
And,
interesting.
and that, then years later, I thought, that's what shared death, when I heard that term. That's
Yeah.
what that was. There's a name for it. It happens to other people.
Well, and again, after Kate had passed, and I'd found out what that it's called shared death, and this happens. Another incident, again, that woke me up to a lot of other things that were happening. About a year before that, I had been at the optometrist's office, and my husband and I had been split. My ex-husband we'd been divorced for 10 years or so. There wasn't any animosity, there wasn't any contact, I didn't think of him very often. It's done, it's over, and you move on with life. But I'm sitting in this optometrist office, and all of a sudden, all the memories, because we traveled a lot together, all these memories, and I could hear him saying, "That was great, wasn't it? That was great." And I'm like, okay, why am I thinking of you? I I don't think of you this much in the last 5 years, let alone in 2 minutes here. And it kept on and on and on. Eventually, I evidently said something out loud. I said, "Stop it, go away, stop this." Because the rest of the waiting room suddenly looked at me. I'm like, oops, I said that out loud. About 3 months later, I was busy working and time to go to sleep. I woke up the corridor and something just said to me, check his Facebook page, which I never did. After we were done, it's done. I don't do. Check his Facebook page. So I feel a little bit weird and I'm like, okay, I'll do that, but why? Um, And again, this was before Katie died, so I was listening to those voices, but not like I should have been. But this time I did. I checked his Facebook page, nothing, and I thought, okay, nope, check deeper. So I went to go and look at his family on the Facebook, and finally found after about 10 minutes, I found his obituary. He had died. And so the next day I contacted his sister-in-law and we got talking. He had died that day at that time in the optometrist's office.
Oh,
that blew my mind because, like, okay, what was that about?
Right. I get
Um,
that.
and that was all before this. But then the shared death with Katie made me remember that again, because that was another one of those things, was like some weird stuff's going on, but there you go.
It's like we get these little pieces of puzzle, and after so many, it starts to make a picture. Like, I get it now. There's something more to this.
Yeah, but what does one do with a picture?
Yeah.
What do you do with that
You
once you
keep
got it?
trying to process it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's it's an ongoing process to process it.
Yeah, it is.
And it was an incredibly deep, the deepest experience I'd had. And yet it was almost a year, it was a bit over a year actually, after this experience, that it suddenly hit me that I got to see my mom and dad. I got to see them again. I got to see the family and friends and Matthew and all those people again. And it never hit me before that. And I got to see them looking their best, looking relaxed and confident, and in the, not like when they were young or whatever, but where they felt they were at their best in their lives. And also that the whole thing with Matthew and having died by suicide, with everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people saying, you do that, you don't get to go wherever. Well, he was right there with the rest of them, and he was as alive as the rest of them were. So that's been an important thing for me also to stress, is that, again, that's my reality. I had no expectation of any of it happening, let alone who I would see or who would be there or what the reasons were they were there. I can't think of anybody that wasn't there, but it was pretty much a spectrum of believers, non-believers, died by suicide, some not very nice people, and some very nice people. And they were all there for Katie. Um, so
And
that
I don't know why it takes us so long to get it. Like I have those aha moments too. It's like, oh, I just made this connection. I never made this connection before. I just realized, like, what took me so long?
Yeah, and then again, something I heard years ago, um, somebody in totally different subject relation, but they said to me, remember, you cannot always be the step ladder, but you can be one step. And
Yeah.
I think that's where I am. It's just a case of one step, and then it's weeks, months, days, whatever go by, and then another step comes into it. So it's however tall the ladder is, or if there's even an end to it on this learning or processing, it's when we're ready for as I was saying to Katie, when you're ready, open the gate. When you're ready, go on. And that's maybe something that I'm just hearing myself thinking about now. We, when we're ready, we will go on. When we're ready, we'll get the next bit of information or process something that had happened to take us to a better understanding.
The only thing I've known to do with it all is to try to recognize it when it happens again and use
Mhm.
it in that moment, the reason it's there for, because you can let it go by. Like if
Yeah,
you get a knowing, like somebody needs help down that road and you don't go, and then you find out later,
they
that,
needed the help. Yeah.
yeah. And then try to pay attention to those voices. And even what I have been working on lately is sometimes I get really angry for no reason and I feel
Mhm.
really bitter in my head. And like, and then I realize, I got to stop it. I got to address this and get rid of it. Because if
Mhm.
I keep carrying it on, I'll like pass it on like a virus to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And
true.
and you may not realize where it come from, but it's now there, and it's my job to get rid of it.
Hmm. Yeah, it was given to you to deal with. So yeah, there's a lot of that I find, um, it's opening my life. It's opening my in a sense that I'm becoming more aware of how I affect other people, not just in the telling of these stories, but how I affect them. Even going for a walk, I can go for a walk, take the dog for a walk, and not just say hi to somebody, or I can smile and stop or compliment them, and that can change everything for them. So I've become more aware of, we can pull somebody out of the bad space by a simple smile. And that's almost a job. It's almost something it's an obligation, not a job, an obligation to do what we can.
And
it is
and
this.
another job too is when we're in that great space and we're smiling and all that, but then somebody can take it from us. And to recognize, wait a minute, it was just taken. How do I get it back? How do I get out of this rut now? They just slam
Mm,
me into, somebody's rude to you or whatever, and just something bad just happened. You got bad in news. Okay, now how do I dig myself out of this hole? Because I can spiral down.
mm.
And then I gotta, how do I get out of it now?
Well, I've kind of over the last 2 years, I've changed a lot of thinking. I've changed my way of thinking in the sense that, to me, if somebody does that, if I'm in a good space and somebody comes in with blah blah, whatever, they cannot take it from me. I can give it to them, but they can't take it from me. The choice is mine,
Yeah.
because my emotion and my feeling, my being is me. So when somebody does that, I'm just like, okay, let them. They can do them. I can do me. So I find myself, not that it never gets there at all, because it is a continual learning thing. But I think I've built up the confidence since that experience with Kate to be able to say, I can stand solidly and claim me and not let somebody take something from me in that sense. I can choose to give it to them and then fight to get it back, or I can just say, no, you're not getting it. So
Yeah.
there's a lot
And
of that that's different now.
like people arguing, well, you stop and think about it. They can go ahead and keep their thinking, and they can go ahead and keep their thinking, and both have the consequences
Yeah,
of it. Let them have their consequences. We don't have to
yeah.
save everybody from their consequences.
And that's the thing. 2 words, let them. So, whether it's in a grocery store and you're frustrated because there's only one checkout counter, so, well, how can they run the store like this? Let them. It's their store. They're arguing. Let them. They're going to have to sort it out. So, not that you don't ever get involved. That's not what I'm saying. But when there's things that's not your place to sort out, it's okay. So let them do. And then it doesn't take from me. It doesn't put me in that spiral, that frustrated zone of, now I'm going to be late to do whatever I wanted to do because the checkout line is so long. So a lot of that has changed in me since those experiences, because it's not that important. There's nothing here it's all important and it's not important at the same time, which is a kind of bit of a baffling statement, but
And humor too is find the humor in things. Sometimes things are so crazy, it's almost laughable, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is. It's all an interesting ride, and I'm enjoying how my thinking is different now, and how I've opened up to the possibilities of anything. So, something feels impossible. No, it's not impossible. It might not happen this time around, but it's not impossible. So there's a lot more to figuring out life than I thought there was before. So,
Yeah. And when you're young and you're working and you can have kids and probably don't have a lot of time to sit and think about these kind of things, I think.
I
And when,
think
as you
that,
get older, you start processing more.
yeah, and that's where people often say to me, I've never had that experience. Well, I've never had an experience. So you read about that, people say, well, I wish I could do that, or I wish I had that experience. My answer to that, because of what I did, is I buried them all. I ignored them all. Sit and think about it. And remember the times that you thought something was weird or out of normal or whatever. You've had these experiences, because I believe not everybody has the incredible experience I had with Kate. I don't, but that doesn't mean I don't think everybody can. The things that are happening to me since then are not unique to me. And I'm finding that most people that I've told my story to in person around here have said, oh, wait a minute. I had an experience similar, maybe not to the shared death, but to some of the other things that had happened. I had something like that happen. As simple as when your phone rings, before you pick it up, you know who it is. Or somebody sends a text. You don't have different text sounds for different people, but you know who that is. And it's like, if you've had those, that is a connection. There's a connection, whether you want to call it intuitive or whatever, but we've all had these experiences. Because if I did for close to 30 years before I recognized them, I'm 100% sure 99% of people have had it.
Well, to have had those experiences, you also had to have had lost your mom, lost your dad, lost your nephew, watch your sister
Yes.
suffer, lose your, I mean, they're suffering. And to me, these experiences, most of them are God's compassion.
To have had the experience I had with Kate, um, yes, life had dealt that I had lost all these people, but things that had happened decades before, when I hadn't lost family, when I was still in my early 20s and in my early 30s, um, those things weren't due to any learning because I hadn't had the loss. I hadn't had the depth of self um, exploration, really, to think about those things. They just boop, were there and then gone. And then it was like the one I was in my early 30s, and I had a dream one night of a friend of ours, him and his wife. But I dreamt of him, and I knew in the dream I was standing in Britain, somewhere in England, and he was standing in front, a long black trench coat, hat on his head with a walking stick, and he turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Annie, just tell Pat I'm okay." And that was it. Well, we were in the United States at that point. They were somewhere in Northern Africa, one of the countries up there, and had maybe once a year contact through letter writing, cell phones and email. Internet wasn't there yet. And I tracked her down and I called and I said, "I can't talk long. It's expensive. I just want to tell you, and I don't know why I have to, but Bill, I had this dream about Bill. Is he there? Because I'd like to tell him, as well, that he was just standing and he was in England and he says to tell you that he's okay." And there was this long silence, and she said, "Annie, Bill died a couple of months ago."
Hmm.
So, and that again, I told her and it was done. And only after the shared death with Kate did I remember that. But that was many, many years ago. So it's it's sometimes it takes a big one to make you remember the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
I suppose
fortunate.
if we break a bone, we might start remembering other times we broke a bone. It's just like our minds tend to find
Into,
connections.
yeah. Yeah, we don't think of, you go to hospital, you don't think of it, life moves on. Then you're in a hospital and somebody asks you, how many times have you had surgery? Oh, yeah, I've had five. But that's not in your daily mind. It's
Yeah.
it's not there. So it's been an incredibly interesting ride.
And
And
a lot of people that's had NDEs, they'll say, but I had these other experiences before that. And several years ago, was reading something. I'm negative. I'm O negative, and I was reading that negative blood people tend to be spiritual. And I thought, well, I wonder if we're more prone to have near-death experiences. So I started doing these little polls on near-death experience groups, and every
mm,
time it was about the same. Like 85% of NDErs were negative blood, and
mm,
so I thought, well, maybe we're just different.
mm,
We're just
that's
born
interesting.
different. Maybe we
I think
die
I, re
different.
I read something or heard something about that, about the blood um, and connection with NDE. I don't
I have
know.
tried to get researchers to do like real research on it, and nobody will do it. Okay, I thought it was interesting.
Well, it's not surprising. I think, it's a slow. There's fortunately there are now people looking at NDEs and SDEs, fortunately, because I kind of felt a little lonely out there, not knowing what the heck had happened. So maybe one day they will do that when enough people push it. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I'm hoping for more scientific study on NDEs instead of like when do we get past just telling our stories? When is somebody going to be able to take all this information and make scientific exploration or
Conclusions about it.
whatever about it? Because it seems as long as they're rolling their eyes and saying this is just chemicals in the brain, they're never going to understand. They're spending all this money sending spaceships to the moon or wherever, but
Yeah,
we went, a
but
lot of
dealing.
us, my second NDE, I went through a tunnel and I was shot like a rocket right through space and I was in up in this big white place and, all this stuff. And I saw my boys being told the next day that I had died. Well, of course I didn't die. I was told it
Mhm.
was my time. I couldn't come back, but then they let me. And so I come back with this gratitude that God allowed me to come back and raise my boys like he defied the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
This, then I'm thinking, how do I see something and never happened? Something that in the future that was going to be the future, but isn't,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
and it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of that, and I think for me personally, it's because a large proportion of even some of my family sort of like, yeah, okay, mom, you had that. Yes, okay, you want another something to eat, another cup of coffee, and
right,
it's not really taken in. But to me, that's okay
yeah,
because it's my experience, and like with a lot of other things in life, nobody, or not nobody, but a large proportion of the population is not going to believe that. We're never really going to get consensus on that, I don't think, until it's right in everybody's face at the same time. And
yeah,
even then, I think it's going to be some people are going to say, oh, they must have put something in the water or the air or whatever it is. And I know mine was by in no way any of my experiences to do with medication because I don't even now take any medication. I've never been on regular medication. I took some antibiotic for the cat bite because I had it here, but I'm not on a regular medication. So it's not that induced. There was, but the people who don't get it or don't believe it or don't want to go there because death is a scary thing to a lot of people. So they don't want to touch on any part of that. And I find that the
yeah,
people who are more willing to talk about death and dying are those that are more willing to hear these stories.
right.
Those that are scared of it and saying, I'm not ever going to die, I'm going to live until 300 years old or whatever it is, still going to die. But if they're not there, they don't want to talk about it. Um, so I know in my lifetime, probably your lifetime, we're never going to get to saying, yes, okay, here it is, because there's just not the gain to for, for enough people to want to know that.
And sometimes I wonder, is there any reason why we're able, have the internet and be able to talk about this to bring it out now? Like, is some big disaster, something going to happen? That's what I've always thought. Is some big disaster going to happen? And people are like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to be hysterical because I remember hearing all these NDEs that we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
okay. But then here lately, when I see the stuff with the AI and the robots and wanting to put people inside a robot so they live forever, like their brain, that maybe more people say, no, I've heard enough into ease. I'll just go ahead and go the natural way and not fall into, there's got to be a reason, I think, to why we're able to be able to talk about this now, like we are, and people are interested in it now. And I think COVID really helped the interest too. People who were going about their lives thinking, I'm never going to die, to COVID. Oh my God, I could just get this and die within a week.
And in addition to that, they were then slowed down. They stayed at home, they worked from home. So life slowed down enough for them to be able to think of these things. So I don't, it's hard to imagine what the main reason is for it, but it's a good thing. And from, watching NDEs and being in contact with people who contacted me after interviews like this, it's very interesting to see how people have found so much gain from it. From they really benefited. And I know even, after Kate died, for the first year, that's all I did almost was listen to NDE after NDE and search for the shared experiences, listen to psychics, listen to anything I could about death. Because, and I did to a certain extent before, but it wasn't my main focus. But listening to all of those was really comforting, even though I had my own experience. It was almost a confirmation that I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yours even listened to it this morning during breakfast. I was listening to yours and I paused it and I told my husband, I said, isn't this strange how she was at the ceiling, looking down at your sister and
sister,
her friend, and that my 5-year-old drowning, that I went from drowning to at the ceiling, looking down at my mom and my
yeah.
sister, and then I was back in my body, and then I, continued my dying process, I guess. But um, I was like, how could I make this stuff up? Like, I'm always have to double check, make sure
Yes.
that I am not making this stuff up. Like, how many times do I have to do? confirm
Yeah.
myself, but I do.
Uh-huh.
Like she was at the ceiling too and saw, and because I asked my mom later about my drowning and what she remembered, and because I had
Mhm.
looked down, hovering over the pond, and see that once they were done at the kitchen, now they're sitting on the bed sheet, at the pond. And
Yes.
so, it gives me these confirmations because
Nations.
I
Yes.
always want to make sure I'm not this crazy lady out here making up stuff. Because that's the last thing I want to be is a crazy
Yeah.
lady out here making up stuff and making a fool of herself, you
Well,
know.
and I think, and I absolutely hear you. And that was my big concern, I would say, the first year or so. Now I don't give a hoot. I know who I am. I know my experience. And if somebody thinks I'm crazy, they're entitled to think that. Because somewhere down the line, they will know that I was right. Or
Hmm.
that that sounds so pretentious. That these things are possible because they are going to die and they are going to know that there is something. So they're going to know that. So it's for right now in my part of life, right now, I'm okay to be. If somebody thinks I'm crazy, go right ahead.
I
That's
have told my sons, um, now I want to tell you something. I want you to listen to me because I usually don't talk
mm,
like that. They know
mm,
mom's being serious now. Okay.
yeah.
And I told them both, I said, when something happens to me, and they're like, okay, I want you to know this. Like, okay. I never made up anything about my NDEs and all that stuff, my
Mm,
childhood, everything. I said, I never lied about any of it. I said, I want you to know that that really was real, that I really was in heaven, you know,
mm,
and
yeah.
my ectopic pregnancy at 25, and that I begged, God to let me come back to raise you boys. And I want you to know, it was because of God let me come back and raise you. I want them to know that I was never lying about that.
Hmm.
And so if there's anything I want you to know one thing, and that's it, that I wasn't lying.
And I think, some people will get that. It's like my kids too. I've told them this is the fact. They've watched the videos and they've, heard my story and read the story. But I sometimes, okay, this is just what's coming. Sometimes you, okay, I'm going to give an example. My son was diagnosed with leukemia about 22 years ago now. And Kate didn't understand what I was feeling and the worry and everything. So about 3 months into this, she was like, she called me up and she got angry with me the one day because I was upset and I was researching and doing all sorts of stuff. And she said, I don't understand this. You making it like yours. Why don't you just let it go? He's doing better, all that sort of stuff. And I got angry in that moment and I hung up the phone. And then I thought about it and I thought, she could not possibly understand what I'm going through unless her son had exactly the same problem. So some people will never understand or will never believe. Fortunately, something like one of our kids having cancer is not going to happen to everybody, but we're all going to die. So whether they believe it now or just say, yes, Mama, I understand you didn't lie, they cannot fully grasp that, but one day they will. So that's the assurance that I have in that if somebody says, well, I don't believe it, but I know you didn't lie because you're telling me and I know you wouldn't lie to me. They still can't comprehend it or fully understand it. But to me, the comforting thing is that one day they will, and they don't have to go through the thing like a kid having a diagnosis like that. So I think that puts it in a different level for me
Hmm.
in that whether they just not just saying it, but whether they believe that you were telling the truth, they can't understand your experience,
Right.
but they will one day.
Yeah.
There's no way out of that. They will
Yeah.
one day.
I know they will.
Yeah.
They will too. Because they have their own things that has happened and they're not facing them.
Yeah.
They've had some things that like, how did this happen? And I just don't want to go there. And even my stepdaughter, um, her daughter one day, my granddaughter years ago had said that she was playing in the pool and she was under the water and then she's all scared and animated about, she was like she was drowning, but she's explaining to me. And then she starts giggling. Every time she told me it was the same way. Then at this one point she starts giggling. And then I saw mommy and she was look around, Skylar, where you at? Skylar, Skylar. And she's giggling. And I'm like, oh my God, she was out of her body because she's
Yeah.
underwater, but now she's describing
Being out of
outside
the
and
body.
watching her mom looking around for her.
Yeah.
And so I tried telling my stepdaughter, I said, I think she had NDE. Oh no, don't you dare say that. Okay, I won't. But every time that child would tell me, I would just sit there, keep my mouth shut. But she would say it the same way. And like, someday, someday.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Someday they will. I had one of those, but it wasn't an NDE. It was somewhere in the early 2000s. And just normal day, I went to sleep, normal, no, nothing different from anything. And the next thing I started giggling because I was kind of like a little bit like Superman, your arms straight out and you're flying through the air. And we lived in Tennessee at that time, screaming over the land, and I recognized I'm heading south. And I went over hit Florida, went over the water, went back into northwest. The country's called Southwest Africa, Namibia. Inland over there, scooted over a friend's house, went down to Cape Town, South Africa, where I used to live, right to a friend's house across the road from my house. And I saw they'd put up a whitewashed wall, and there was a swimming pool in the backyard. She lived in Chicago, but the husband still lived in the house. And then poof, I was back again. So the next morning, I emailed her and I said, "Hey, when did you put the wall up in the house in the swimming pool? Because that wasn't there when we left." And she didn't answer me for a good many hours. And then she got back and she said, "How did you know? I have looked on Google Earth because that was about the big thing back then." She says, "There's no ways, there's not a photograph of that house. There's nothing on anything that you could have known that." And I'm like, "I don't know how to tell you, but I saw it." So there's stuff like that that happens that, again, pretty much like your daughter, your stepdaughter's like, you just don't want to address right then.
Yeah.
But it'll come back and she'll know. One day when that kitty gets, older and says more definitively, this is what happened. And then one day when we all die, they get it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe that's when everybody will get it. We're
Yeah.
not meant to at the same
Yeah.
time.
It makes me think of the movie Miracles from Heaven. The little girl tells her NDE, and the mom says, well, what are you going to do? Some people won't believe you. And she says, that's okay. We get there and we get there. So,
There you go. That said much better than what I was saying. And yeah.
well, I appreciate you coming on, and it's
It's
nice meeting
exciting.
you.
Well, it's good
And
meeting you too. And I had listened to your experiences before with the
okay.
drowning
Yeah.
and seeing your parents. So that was interesting to hear it from you again.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I'll get this sent out to you later today.
Thank you, Peggy. All right.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.